Hey, what's going on, everybody? In this video, we're going to be doing a book review of The Naked Olympics, The True Story of the Ancient Games by Tony Perrottet. And this was a popular history book on the ancient Olympics that were held in Olympia, Greece for about 1200 years from the mid-8th century BC through the beginning of the 4th century CE. And it's pretty remarkable that you can have basically 1200 years of uninterrupted 4-year cycles of the Olympic Games. I mean, in modern times, we haven't even gone 100 years without We've had, I think, 3 interruptions in our modern Olympics. So this is quite remarkable in of itself, but let's get started with the review. So let's start with the bad things, like I like to do, so we can end on a good note. There was a couple statements that Tony Perrottet made they're kind of far-fetched. Basically, he's trying to make the argument that sports were pretty much the biggest thing for the ancient Greeks, which I think that's kind of a stretch. I guess I can't find it exactly, but to paraphrase, the author basically said athletics were the most important thing to the Greeks, and that is definitely a stretch. It would be hard to say what exactly would be the most important thing to a Greek. Probably it would be his political life and his citizenship to the polis that he lived in. Probably, I mean, if you could even make an argument that there was a most important thing for the average Greek citizen. The only other thing that I did not like, which was a big thing for me, was he doesn't note any of his sources per se. He does have a bibliography at the end of the book, but there's no direct in-text citations or anything, even for the quotes. And I don't know, that's just kind of weird for me. I don't like that in case I want to look something up when they make an argument, when an author makes an argument, to see if it's legit or not. Hey, Soph. Oh, kitty. I'm trying to steal all the attention, aren't you? Do you like the Olympics? You do? Okay. Well, anyways, so let's get to the good stuff, because there's definitely a lot more good than bad in this book. This was my favorite book out of the 3 that I read on ancient sports and the ancient Olympics. The author does a great job discussing basically all aspects that an athlete that would participate in the Olympic Games would go through. I mean, he goes through practice and training at the gymnasia, and the palestra, which would be where you actually wrestled and that sort of thing in the gymnasium. He goes over how coaches trained and taught people, and how they were kind of self-made, kind of athletes past their prime and that sort of thing. Then he also goes on basically a day-by-day itinerary of the ancient Olympic Games, which I thought was really cool. And he goes basically, on day 1 we have chariot racing. He talks about that and how psychotic it is. Basically, it is legit Ben-Hur. So if you just move the camera, sorry about that. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, it's basically just like Ben-Hur. I mean, people died all the time in the chariot racing, from crashes and falling off and all kinds of stuff. He also goes over what spectators would have to go through, which was basically dehydration and heat stroke, because they only had sort of temporary makeshift shaft wells for the Olympic Games. They didn't have a permanent water source at Olympia, which could be really bad when you have thousands of spectators and that sort of thing. Learned lots of tidbits. I learned that married women could not attend the Olympic Games at all. They could not watch. But if you were single, you could, which I thought was kind of interesting. And obviously that's a lot of Greek social mores and that sort of thing going on with that. But my favorite part of the book was definitely his description of each event in turn, in the order that they would go through. For example, the chariot racing, then the other horse events, and then the next day there's the pentathlon, and then the running events, and then we get to the fighting events, which was the events I was most interested in, and that included wrestling, boxing, and the pankration, which was essentially the ancient Greek version of UFC, and there was even less rules than modern UFC MMA fighting. So basically the only rule was no eye gouging, and that's it. And a lot of these fighting events basically the only way that the fight ends is one person either surrenders through a symbol by raising a finger, and they're obviously the loser, which was really bad. Like, your city-state would basically shun you almost for basically bringing shame upon yourself and like your polis. So it was not a good. There was definitely no consolation prizes or participation awards in the Ancient Olympics. If you came in second place, you were pretty much just a huge failure. But anyways, and the only other way you could lose an event was if you didn't surrender, you could either be incapacitated or die at the other opponent's hands. And that was not like a specific rarity per se. Like, it didn't happen all the time, but it was definitely a good possibility. If you were super like dedicated and didn't want to surrender, there was a good chance you probably could be like choked to death or something. But anyways, I had a great time reading this. There were a few things I thought were kind of stretches. Oh my goodness, the soap just moved the camera again. Anyways, but overall, I thought it was a great book on the Ancient Olympics, and it definitely brings the reader to the spectacle itself and how it was basically just a huge festival, because it's not all just the sports. There's a lot of sacrifices to the gods and that sort of thing as well. But anyways, I'm going to give the Naked Olympics a solid 4 out of 5 stars. And if you enjoy the Olympics or want to read about the original Olympics, you should definitely pick up this book. And remember, read victoriously.